So today we're going to talk about how to monitor conversations in closed spaces. We're going to start off by defining what we mean by closed groups and messaging apps. And then we're going to talk about the ethics of being in these spaces and using them for monitoring and research. And then we're going to end with some search tips for different platforms. My name is Esther Chan. I'm First Draft's APAC Bureau Editor, and I'm based in Sydney. So I'm going to start by walking you through the most popular messaging apps. At the top of the list are WhatsApp, which has 2 billion users globally, and Facebook Messenger, which is used by 1.3 billion people around the world. So some apps are native to particular countries, like KakaoTalk for South Korea and Wechat for China. Some other apps are just really popular in specific countries. For example, Telegram in Iran before it was blocked, and Line in Japan, Taiwan, and Thailand. And then we have Signal, which is pretty special because it's open source and often considered one of the most secure messaging apps. During our previous training sessions, we actually had some journalists in the US saying that no one really uses WhatsApp anymore. In fact, that probably only represents some demographics in the US. There are still tons of other diaspora communities in the US who use WhatsApp and other messaging apps. For example, the Chinese diaspora community uses the WeChat a lot to communicate among themselves, as well as with families and friends in China or other parts of the world. So if you're interested in this, we actually have an article on our website about how misinformation flows through diaspora communities. So do check that out. Now, why are messaging apps important? For one, it allows free access to news. In some countries like Brazil, time spent on WhatsApp and Facebook doesn't count against the monthly data caps. Sometimes this is called free basics or zero basics. So it provides an incentive for people to rely on these apps for news and other kinds of information. On the other hand, accessing news via these platforms can help us get around paywalls as well. So the combination of the paywalls on news sites and the fact that some of these apps don't use up your data means that people are most likely going to use them for news. We can see from this data from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. So markets that use WhatsApp for news, you can see 53% in Brazil, 50% in Malaysia, 49% in South Africa. And then countries that rely on Facebook Messenger for news are Greece, 25%, Poland, 22%, Belgium, 12%. And also Viber, Greece again at 17%, and Bulgaria next. So this is why we're interested in messaging apps, because people are not just using them to chat with one another, but also for news consumption. In 2019, Mark Zuckerberg wrote about Facebook's pivot to privacy. So that came at a time when there was already a trend of people moving more and more into closed spaces and using messaging apps for their news consumption, because it's an option for people who are trying to avoid monitoring or trying to avoid being targeted or harassed online. Also, some countries have legislation in place that punishes the sharing of false information. For example, just last week, Malaysia made it illegal to share COVID misinformation. So these apps are places that feel a little bit safer because they're less likely to be monitored. One of the changes that came shortly after Zuckerberg's announcement is that Facebook groups were prioritized in the algorithm and people's news feeds based on surveys in which Facebook asked the users about how much they care about a particular Facebook group. And because of the popularity of Facebook around the world, we're really interested in the information that is circulating within Facebook groups. And then we're also trying to understand how these groups are potentially a place for sharing vaccine misinformation or misinformation of other kinds. Here's some data again from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. This is about the percent of Facebook and WhatsApp users who rely on groups. So you can see that these numbers are quite significant. 51% of Facebook users said they used groups in the past month. And then 14% of those users would rely on public Facebook groups for news and information about politics. On the other hand, security is a big draw for people sharing information on these apps, but the degree of security on them vary, right? So on Facebook, you have end-to-end encryption, but group administrators can create an invite link to the groups and post these links on the web. And once the invite link to a WhatsApp group is posted online, it effectively makes the group public. This is also a way for researchers to find and join WhatsApp groups and see what people are talking about in those groups, right? Another thing to note is that WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, meaning Facebook owns WhatsApp's data, even though they cannot see the content of the messages. Signal, on the other hand, similarly has end-to-end encryption. It's also open source, and there's the option to send self-destructing messages. This is one of the apps that's most recommended by security experts. Telegram is not encrypted by default, but it can be turned on in the secret mode. There are also public channels which you can join or research, and those are also not encrypted. Then we have Wechat, which does not offer end-to-end encryption at all. And on top of that, you may also want to be aware of the surveillance on the app in China. And what are some of the challenges with misinformation in these closed spaces? First of all, misinformation on these spaces travels fast, and encryption makes them hard to track. So unlike a public group on Facebook or on Twitter, it's hard to tell where that message has been. Even if you find a rumor that's circulating on WhatsApp, it's hard to find the origin of it. All those challenges actually were mentioned in this report by BuzzFeed News, which found that following the 2019 mass shooting in El Paso, Texas, there were lots of rumors and misleading information about the shooting in closed apps like WhatsApp and also Facebook Messenger. So let's talk a bit more about WhatsApp because it has more than 2 billion monthly active users. It's the most popular messaging app globally, and it's the main messaging app in Brazil, Spain, and India. So like we mentioned before, WhatsApp is a really important platform for understanding how diaspora communities communicate with each other. And this is actually a real life example on the right here, a message that someone on our team in the US received from a salsa dance group last year on WhatsApp. So a member of the group sent this picture to everyone saying that this is an urgent community notice, security alert for USA residents. And the notice went on to say, be warned, there is a group going to homes and pretending to be officials from Home Affairs. They have documents with the letterhead Department of Home Affairs and claim to be confirming that everyone has a valid ID for the upcoming census. They are robbing homes. And this notice also has logo of the New Jersey Triangle Park Neighborhoods Association on it. And turns out this is actually something that happened in South Africa. So it was a real event, but it got repurposed and went viral in all sort of other places as a tactic for scaring people about the census in the US in 2020. So it would be particularly concerning for an immigrant because even though there is no Department of Home Affairs in the US, this sounds a lot like maybe the Department of Homeland Security, which is the department in the US that deports immigrants. And one thing to pay attention to is that the message was circulating on WhatsApp, and specifically in closed WhatsApp groups. And in the US, WhatsApp is actually really popular among the Latinx community. So this kind of rumors would be particularly harmful to them because as we speak, there is a massive surge of migrants along the US border with Mexico. And you can imagine a false rumor like this one could really cause panic. Back in 2018, during the presidential election in Brazil, First Draft ran a collaborative project called Comprova with 24 newsrooms over 12 weeks. So we had a misinformation tip line where Brazilians could send in misinformation that they were seeing on WhatsApp. In that time period, we actually received over 100,000 messages, and we wrote a report on it. So you can find a report on our website. It's an evaluation of the impact of collaborative journalism on Brazilian journalists and audiences. There were some really interesting findings from this project. One is that we've discussed before, visual media is a popular medium for misinformation. Nearly 50,000 of the messages that we received through the tip line were images. Another thing that we found is that messages that came through the tip line contained very few links to websites. And that's possibly because of programs like zero rating, which means that usage of WhatsApp is free. But as soon as you go to another website, that's going to cost you data and money. Another thing that we found is that audio messages were being sent as well. It wasn't the most popular type of misinformation that we received, but it was still significant. So there were 30 viral audio messages that were sent to the tip line more than 1,600 times. And then allegations of voter fraud accounted for 2/3 of these. What might be a bit challenging from a journalist or researcher's point of view is that audio messages tend to be quite difficult to investigate. And it's quite hard to try to find the source because all you can hear is someone's voice. And there's no way to tell, whose voice it really is. Now we are at the tipping point, which is when we weigh the risk to the public of a particular piece of misinformation versus potential amplification. It's hard to figure out when we reach this tipping point with closed messaging apps because you can't measure engagement that easily. If you see a rumor or misleading information in a WhatsApp group, you are not necessarily going to know how many times that was shared on WhatsApp. The only way you would know is if you were in lots of groups and you counted all the times that it was shared, or if you set up a tip line like we did with Comprova, where we saw that the same rumor was being shared again, and again. So here are some examples from Comprova. The screenshot on the left was shared more than 600 times, and it shows a fabricated conversation between former Petrobras president José Sergio Gabrielli and Fernando Haddad. So the message was about that they were coordinating attacks on Jair Bolsonaro together with Folha, one of Brazil's largest newspapers. Except that conversation never took place. It's all fabricated. In one of the versions of this hoax, a picture of a check is actually used as proof that Haddad's campaign was paying the media to go after Bolsonaro. But again, that picture was not relevant to these fabricated messages. Another example on the right, this image was the piece of misinformation that we received the most during the Comprova project. It is a genuine image of a ballot box on the back of a truck that had not been tampered with. It circulated widely on WhatsApp with a rumor suggesting that the ballots in the box had been pre-stamped with votes for Fernando Haddad. Again, without setting up the tip line, we wouldn't know how viral these photos have been. So one of the biggest ethical questions with closed messaging apps is weighing user privacy versus public interest. There's a certain expectations of privacy with these messaging apps. So the question you want to ask is it worth it to be researching misinformation in these spaces, given that people in there expect some sort of privacy? And some other questions to consider. What is the size of each closed group you are planning to enter? How does that affect the expectation of privacy for each group? Will your story expose group members to negative consequences? What is the public interest in your story? Are you planning on entering multiple groups? And what is the minimum number of closed spaces you can enter into to find the information you need? Here we have a Facebook group called Pro-Vaccine Parenting in Santa Cruz County in California. It's a private group with 69 members only. So if you look at the About section, it says, this group is for parents, grandparents, caregivers, family, and guardians. So knowing that this group is for parents in Santa Cruz County, you have to ask yourself, would you, as a researcher or journalist, join this group, even though you're probably not from there and you may not be a parent? Also, some of these groups on Facebook have initiation questions. So here's a group called New Mexico Informed Vaccine Choice. And you can see that it asks you what brings you to the group, whether you live in New Mexico, and name the city and the area that you live in. So are you going to be forthright in your answers to these questions? If you don't live in New Mexico, are you going to join the group? And what are you going to say? These are some of the ethical questions that you need to expect if you're actually going to join any private groups. And they're probably ones that you should discuss with your organization and your editor. Another thing for you to think about is security. So platforms often ask for personal details upon registration, things like your name, your email, sometimes your identification, phone number, location, or social media credentials. And you may not want to provide these details. On the other hand, downloading an app can also link data to you. For example, if you have an iPhone, usually when you download an app, there is information about what kind of data on your phone is linked to the app. And a lot of people would overlook that. So a couple of months ago, we actually published an article with 8 questions to consider before joining a platform. And in summary, these questions are about personal information, device data, privacy settings, how to identify yourself, content on the site, security, site metrics, and what you will do with the content. So please check out our article for more details. The last section is about news gathering. One thing you can do is to create a tip line. So this is actually something that the messaging app Line, which is popular in Japan, has started recently as an initiative to fight misinformation without sacrificing privacy. And according to an article about this on the site Rest of the World, users can choose to share messages from their encrypted chats with Line's fact-checking account. If the piece of information has already been checked by one of Line's fact-checking partners, the user will automatically receive a message indicating if the information is true, partially true, or false. So this is quite similar to what we did with Comprova, where people would send us tips and then journalists would collaborate and verify or debunk those rumors. And some reasons for setting up a tip line are that you can reach audiences that are more likely to be targeted. You can partner with grassroots groups, community organizations, and libraries, etc. And it's also a good way to build trust within a community because you're directly engaging with them. Next up, we've got some tips for Telegram. If you're interested in researching misinformation that's spreading on Telegram, one thing you can do is search public groups. So you can do a site search on Google or other search engines by typing site:/t.me and then your search terms. And this will search all public Telegram channels for your keywords. One thing about Google is that you have to tell it not to omit some search results. So there is usually a little message at the bottom that says, in order to show you the most relevant results, we have omitted some entries very similar to the 10 already displayed. If you like, you can repeat the search with omitted results included. So we try to click on that so that we're not missing any important information. With Telegram, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that you do not need to join a public channel to look at the content. If you come to a page that looks like this one, ignore the green box that says View in Telegram, and click Preview Channel. And that will allow you to look at the conversation on the public channel without joining it. You can also search for invite links to WhatsApp groups by searching chat.whatsapp.com on any social media platform. So if you search, for example, chat.whatsapp.com on Twitter, and then the keyword vacuna, which is the word in Spanish for vaccine, you will find posts with links to WhatsApp groups that are talking about vaccines in Spanish.